Top 3 facts about moral argument, examined by a skeptic. Wow, such a debatable issue. Let's get into it. So, argument from morality. What is it? The argument from morality is an argument for the existence of God. Argument for morality tends to be based on moral normativity or moral order. Argument from moral normativity observes some aspect of morality and argue that God is the best or only explanation for this, concluding that God must exist. Therefore, argument from morality is quite interesting overall. And what can we deduce about it? Fact number 1, amazing self-confirmation. Regarding this argument, I have always been amazed at the tendency for the speaker presenting and advocating this argument to conclude practically without any weighing of the pros and cons. From the position of a naive observer, the conclusion is that this is a logically self-affirming argument that affects the presenter himself because of its persuasiveness. Of course, a skeptic would wonder to what extent speakers' propensity to loyally serve the religious community and self-promote while speaking about this topic manifests, because, as in many other theological claims, the conclusion that can be imposed can also be varied, and certainly is not the only one. Fact number 2, sudden nihilism. Interesting and often noticeable is the tendency of the proponents of this theory to turn swiftly to nihilism. Example, if morality did not come from God, then everything is a failure. In that case, they claim, human propensity to act that we can assess by moral or immoral action is impossible, meaningless, and existentially disappointing. Strange conclusion. It could even be that this is a deliberately distorted version of simplified psychology that instantly elicits an emotional reaction in both current and upcoming believers. Because, why nihilism? Why should one jump to negative conclusions in a style? If it's not exactly like this, then everything is bad and meaningless. Really? Why? For a skeptic would expect a greater dose of optimism from a believer advocate of this theological argument. So, unlike many religious pessimists, let's be optimistic about this. Therefore, what if? What if we believe that morality comes from God, and that, at the same time, is not the case in some way? We come to the possibility of theological alternatives, and this would, frankly, confuse believers who want to hear a clear and unambiguous message from theologians or priests. Number 3, lack of alternatives. The moral argument has a striking flaw, and that is the lack of alternatives. Non-religious alternatives involving the understanding of anthropology, sociology, psychology, and many social phenomenologies are extremely compelling and therefore unusable within the framework of this theological construction, that is, the argument about morality coming exclusively from God. So, to make this more interesting, let's ignore the extremely compelling non-religious alternatives and focus exclusively on religious ones. Again, what if we believe that morality comes from God, and perhaps, paradoxically, does not even originates from Him, at least not directly? Let's take this hypothesis and be as optimistic as possible, and it is quite possible. Perhaps God created the universe by the first cause, and left the development of morality to human beings. There's nothing awful about that thought, is there? Because if we follow the analogy with human creatures, that is a possibility. What if, for various reasons, the father leaves the development of his child's moral values to himself, his mother, his brothers, or their environment? Then it is so, and it is no reality-breaking paradox or nihilistic nightmare. Another possibility: what if morality is God's challenge to us, to shape our morality in a way that universally corresponds to our biological givens, but also satisfies our developed intellectual aspirations in a balanced way? It sounds great and possible, even from a religious perspective. Simply put, the beauty of such hypothetical alternatives is purely theological in nature, and therefore permissible and irrefutable from the perspective of an excellent theologian, but also unprovable from the perspective of a skeptical scientist. So why is this argument really, if ever, presented without the included alternatives in such an optimistic religious style? My conclusion is as follows. If the argument of morality from God is presented for religious purposes, the primary goal of the speaker is to achieve a psychologically desired effect in the believers and the target audience. Therefore, the inclusion of religious alternatives would weaken the desired effect and confuse believers. More than that, it would encourage skepticism and interest for more questions. Finally, let us recall, in religious environment, it is not so much a matter of arousing curiosity with intriguing theological questions, but making people fascinated and satisfied with the answers presented and offered. Therefore, I consider the argument about morality that comes exclusively from God to be a theological construction based on a solid foundation, but also not the most striking logical achievement of the verbosity of our civilization. Because, if I really had to choose, I would rather contemplate about intriguing, not yet proven possibilities, than be satisfied with expected and well-known, unprovable claims. Did you like this video? Yes, no, or a bit of both? Whatever the case, let me know in the comments section below, and goodbye. Until next time.